In the chilling realm of true crime, there exists a dark and enigmatic category of criminals whose nefarious deeds span decades before justice finally catches up with them. Join us on a bone-chilling journey as we delve into the twisted minds of serial killers who managed to evade the long arm of the law for years, leaving behind a trail of unsolved mysteries and shattered lives. In this gripping exploration, we will unravel the harrowing stories of these elusive predators, uncovering the intricate web of clues, missed opportunities, and relentless determination it took to finally bring them to justice. Get ready to be captivated, horrified, and astonished as we delve into the unsettling world of serial killers that took decades to be captured. Viewer discretion is advised. This is not for the faint of heart. Bind, torture, kill. The BTK killer, one of the most notorious serial killers in US history, instilled fear and terror in the hearts of Wichita, Kansas, from the 1970s to the 1990s. This sadistic predator claimed the lives of 10 innocent victims, leaving a trail of mayhem and unanswered questions. From his brutal crimes to his cunning methods of operation, the BTK killer's reign of terror remains etched in the annals of true crime. Throughout his spree, the BTK killer displayed a chilling level of calculation and sadism. He meticulously planned his attacks, often selecting victims who lived alone or whose homes were easily accessible. Once inside, the killer would bind his victims with cords or other restraints, escalating the nightmare by torturing them both physically and mentally. Unspeakable acts committed in the confines of their homes turned these quiet suburban neighborhoods into scenes straight out of a horror film. The BTK killer thrived on the power and control he exerted over his victims. He would taunt them, reveling in their fear and vulnerability as he unleashed his depravity upon them. Some victims were subjected to prolonged periods of torment, while others faced a swift and merciless death. The variety and cruelty of his methods bewildered law enforcement, leaving them perplexed and desperate for answers. As news of the BTK killer's crimes spread, fear gripped the entire community. The people of Wichita lived in constant dread, locking their doors, securing their windows, and double-checking their locks in a desperate attempt to salvaguard themselves against this unknown monster. The elaborate security measures served as a stark reminder of the evil lurking in their midst. The investigation into the BTK killer's identity became one of the longest and most perplexing in US criminal history. Law enforcement tirelessly analyzed evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pursued countless leads. Yet the killer remained elusive. His ability to conceal his true identity and evade capture baffled even the most seasoned detectives. Thousands of tips flooded in, each one a potential breakthrough in the case. But amidst the chaos, there was one man who seemed to relish the attention and the satisfaction of playing a dangerous game with both law enforcement and the media. The BTK killer reveled in his notoriety, leaving cryptic messages and pieces of evidence at the crime scenes. For decades, the true identity of the BTK killer remained a mystery. Despite numerous theories and suspects, the puzzle pieces refused to fit together. The elusive killer left no trace that could conclusively link him to the crimes, no clear indication of his motive, and no telling signs of his personality. However, all mysteries eventually come to an end. In 2005, after more than 30 years of terror, the BTK killer finally made a fatal mistake. Seeking recognition for his crimes, he sent a floppy disk to the local media, taunting them with a chilling message. It was this act of hubris that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Investigators were able to trace the disk back to its source, leading them to a man named Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader, an unassuming family man and active member of his community, was the man behind the BTK killer persona. To those who knew him, Rader's arrest came as a shock, unmasking a sinister double life hidden behind the facade of an ordinary citizen. The killer, who had haunted the city for decades, was finally behind bars. Rader offered chilling confessions, recounting the details of each murder with disturbing clarity. The courtroom was filled with gasps and tears as the families of the victims confronted the man responsible for their unimaginable pain. Through the course of the trial, Rader showed little remorse, his cold facade intact. Today, Dennis Rader resides in a maximum security prison, serving 10 consecutive life sentences for his heinous crimes. The BTK killer's reign of terror has ended, and the scars he left on the community of Wichita will endure for generations. The case of the BTK killer stands as a chilling reminder of the darkest aspects of humanity, the thin veil that separates good from evil. The deeply unsettling question remains: how could a seemingly ordinary person unleash such depravity upon his fellow human beings? Perhaps it serves as a somber reminder that monsters do not always come in the form we expect them to, and their true nature may remain hidden until the day they are finally unmasked. The Boston Strangler. The Boston Strangler has gone down in history as one of the most notorious serial killers the world has ever known. From 1962 to 1964, this elusive predator terrorized the city of Boston, leaving its residents in a state of perpetual fear. The name Boston Strangler became synonymous with horror, as a string of brutal murders shocked the nation. The crimes committed by the Boston Strangler were horrifically similar. The victims, predominantly women, were found strangled to death in their own homes. There was an eerie pattern to these killings. The killer would gain entry to the victim's residence, often pretending to be a repairman or a lost delivery person. Once inside, his true intentions would be revealed, resulting in a brutal and often sadistic assault. News of these heinous crimes spread like wildfire, capturing the attention of the entire country. Every woman in Boston feared that she could be the next victim, and families lived in perpetual anxiety, locking doors and windows, and keeping vigilant watch at all times. The city was gripped by a palpable sense of dread as law enforcement struggled to catch the elusive killer. The investigation into the Boston Strangler murders was one of the most extensive and complex in history. Hundreds of detectives and investigators tirelessly combed through evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pursued leads. The pressure to solve these crimes mounted each day as public outcry demanded justice for the innocent lives violently taken. As the body count climbed, law enforcement agencies faced immense challenges in identifying a suspect. The killer left few traces behind, skillfully avoiding detection and evading capture. The city lived on edge, caught in the relentless grip of terror. But amidst the chaos, there emerged a break in the case that would ultimately expose the true identity of the Boston Strangler. In 1964, a suspect named Albert DeSalvo was arrested on unrelated charges. While in custody, DeSalvo made a shocking confession. He claimed to be the notorious Boston Strangler. DeSalvo's confession sent shockwaves throughout the city. People demanded answers, desperately wanting to believe that the reign of terror was finally at an end. The man who had haunted their dreams, the embodiment of evil itself, had been captured. However, doubts began to emerge. The details of DeSalvo's confession appeared inconsistent, and there were concerns about whether he was truly responsible for all the murders attributed to the Boston Strangler. Some believed that he may have been an attention-seeking individual who falsely claimed responsibility for crimes he did not commit. Despite these doubts, DeSalvo was tried and convicted for unrelated crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, providing a sense of closure for the terrified residents of Boston. But the question remained: was he truly the Boston Strangler? Decades later, advancements in DNA technology shed new light on the case. In 2013, DNA evidence linked DeSalvo to one of the Strangler's victims, effectively confirming his involvement in at least one of the murders. This breakthrough was a bittersweet vindication for those who had lived in fear for so long. While DeSalvo's guilt for the other killings attributed to the Boston Strangler remains unproven, the shadow of his crimes will forever stain the pages of history. The fear and relentless pursuit of justice by the victims' families and the dogged determination of law enforcement serve as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. As with many infamous serial killers, the true identity of the Boston Strangler remains an enigma. We may never know with certainty if Albert DeSalvo was solely responsible for all the murders, or if there were other unknown culprits involved. The case serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity, forever etching the name Boston Strangler into the annals of true crime history. The Grim Sleeper. The Grim Sleeper, also known as Lonnie David Franklin Jr., is a convicted serial killer who operated in Los Angeles, California between 1985 and 2007. His nickname, the Grim Sleeper, derives from the extended gap, or sleep, between his apparent crimes. Franklin targeted mostly African American women, sexually assaulting and brutally murdering them before disposing of their bodies. His case shocked the nation, revealing not only the heinousness of his crimes, but also exposing the failures of law enforcement in identifying and apprehending him. Franklin's crimes began in the 1980s, although the police and the public were unaware of any connection until much later. His victims, often involved in prostitution or struggling with drug addiction, were considered vulnerable targets, making it easier for Franklin to exploit them and evade suspicion. His crimes typically involved luring victims into his vehicle or secluded locations, and then sexually assaulting and fatally shooting them. For over 2 decades, Franklin's crimes went unnoticed by the authorities, leaving communities in fear and the victims' families without answers and closure. The lack of connections between the cases and insufficient resources dedicated to solving them contributed to the lengthy investigation and allowed Franklin to continue his spree undetected. In 2007, a significant breakthrough occurred when a DNA sample from a 1987 crime scene was linked to another crime from 2002. This revelation provided the investigators with a crucial lead connecting multiple unsolved cases to a single perpetrator. It was the first substantial break in the investigation, leading to the identification and eventual arrest of Franklin in July 2010. Subsequent investigations revealed a trove of evidence tying Franklin to more victims than previously suspected. The extent of his crimes, spanning over 2 decades, highlighted the magnitude of his terrible acts. As the public became aware of the Grim Sleeper's horrifying deeds, it sparked a widespread outcry for justice and an evaluation of how law enforcement failed to connect the dots earlier. During Franklin's trial, it became evident that the investigation into his crimes was plagued by institutional failures and shortcomings. The initial lack of media attention and public awareness surrounding the case, coupled with limited resources allocated to investigating the underrepresented victims, contributed to the prolonged period of Franklin's criminal activity. This raised systemic questions about racial biases within criminal investigations and the prioritization of certain victims over others. The trial, which began in 2016, shed light on the victims and their families, ultimately providing them an opportunity to share their stories and seek justice. Franklin was found guilty on multiple counts of murder and received consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm another person. The Grim Sleeper case not only exposed a serial killer preying on vulnerable individuals in Los Angeles, but also revealed the shortcomings in the criminal justice system. It served as a catalyst for change, prompting reforms in how law enforcement agencies handle and prioritize cases involving marginalized communities. It highlighted the need for increased resources, improved communication among agencies, and a commitment to ensuring that no victim is forgotten or overlooked. The impact of the Grim Sleeper's crimes remains profound, as his actions left a lasting mark on the victims' families, friends, and communities. Their resilience, along with the determination of law enforcement and the justice system, ultimately led to Franklin's capture and conviction. However, the scars left behind by his reign of terror cannot be easily erased. The case of the Grim Sleeper serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, thorough investigations, and the pursuit of justice for all victims, regardless of their background or circumstances. While it is a dark chapter in the history of Los Angeles, it also highlights the power of collective resolve and the relentless pursuit of truth and closure. The Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer, also known as the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, is a notorious American serial killer who committed a series of crimes between 1974 and 1986. The identity of the Golden State Killer remained a mystery for decades until his arrest in 2018. This dark chapter in American criminal history shocked the nation and left a lasting impact on the communities affected by his reign of terror. The Golden State Killer's crime spree began in the mid-1970s in the Sacramento area of California. He initially targeted young women who were home alone, breaking into their residences and assaulting them. These early attacks demonstrated a calculated and sadistic nature, with the rapist often spending hours tormenting his victims, threatening them and their families, and perpetrating acts of violence. As law enforcement struggled to connect the dots and identify a single perpetrator behind the escalating attacks, the Golden State Killer expanded his crimes beyond rape. In the later stages of his spree, he turned to murder, earning the additional moniker of the original Night Stalker. The murders were characterized by extreme violence and a distinct lack of a discernible motive. He targeted couples and families, often breaking into their homes, brutally killing his victims, and sometimes staying in the residence for hours after the crime. The Golden State Killer displayed a level of sophistication that confounded investigators. He meticulously planned his attacks, gathering information about his victims and meticulously studying their routines. This allowed him to strike without warning, leaving targets feeling helpless and living in constant fear. He managed to elude capture for decades, leaving a trail of sorrow, pain, and unresolved grief in his wake. Over the years, various theories and suspects emerged, and law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to uncover any leads that might lead to identifying the Golden State Killer. Advances in DNA technology and the creation of specialized investigative units dedicated to cold cases eventually led to a breakthrough in the investigation. In 2018, authorities arrested a suspect, Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer living in Sacramento. The arrest of DeAngelo sent shockwaves through the nation, as the Golden State Killer's true identity was finally revealed. DeAngelo's arrest brought a sense of relief to the survivors and the affected communities who had lived in fear for decades. His appearance in court and subsequent guilty pleas further solidified the evidence that linked him to the crimes, bringing a semblance of closure to the victims and their families. The Golden State Killer case represents both the power of modern investigative techniques and the devastating and lasting impact of unresolved crimes on individuals and communities. The scale and heinousness of the Golden State Killer's actions have made him one of the most infamous and chilling figures in American criminal history. The arrest and conviction of Joseph James DeAngelo serve as a reminder that justice can prevail even after many years have passed. It also highlights the importance of perseverance and dedication in solving cold cases. The case of the Golden State Killer has become a benchmark for law enforcement agencies, inspiring renewed efforts to identify and apprehend other long-elusive criminals. While the Golden State Killer's reign of terror has finally come to an end, the scars left by his crimes will never fully heal. The survivors and the communities impacted by his actions continue to grapple with the traumatic aftermath. However, the arrest and conviction of Joseph James DeAngelo provide a glimmer of hope and the opportunity for healing and moving forward. The Green River Killer. The Green River Killer is one of the most notorious and enigmatic serial killers in American history. Over the span of several decades, this elusive murderer terrorized the Pacific Northwest, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. The story of the Green River Killer is a chilling and disturbing tale that continues to haunt the collective memory of the region and the nation as a whole. The Green River Killer's reign of terror began in the early 1980s, primarily in the Seattle-Tacoma area of Washington state. His preferred victims were young women, many of whom were involved in sex work or were vulnerable in various ways. The killer's modus operandi involved luring these women into his vehicle, typically a pickup truck, under the pretense of offering them a ride or money for sex. Once he had them in his control, he would brutally strangle them to death, often in secluded or wooded areas, before disposing of their bodies in remote locations. The early victims of the Green River Killer began to disappear with alarming frequency, sending shockwaves through the local communities. Families and friends of the missing women were left in a state of constant fear and anguish, not knowing the fate of their loved ones. Law enforcement agencies, initially slow to recognize the pattern, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of missing persons cases. As the body count continued to rise, investigators started connecting the dots. The killer's signature method of murder, along with the geographic proximity of the crime scenes, suggested that a serial killer was at large. The media soon dubbed the unknown perpetrator the Green River Killer, due to the location where many of the bodies were discovered. Despite their best efforts, law enforcement faced significant challenges in apprehending the Green River Killer. The killer displayed a disturbing level of cunning and a meticulous approach to his crimes. He often moved the bodies of his victims to different locations, making it difficult for authorities to establish a clear pattern. Additionally, the victims' transient lifestyles and involvement in sex work made them less likely to be reported missing promptly. As the 1980s progressed, the Green River Killer's body count continued to rise. Fear and paranoia gripped the region as residents wondered who might be the next victim. The police launched an extensive investigation, but the killer remained elusive, leaving few clues for them to follow. Despite the intense public and law enforcement scrutiny, the killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unsolved murders. The 1990s brought renewed efforts to catch the Green River Killer. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to re-examine evidence from the crime scenes, and they began to use DNA analysis to link the murders. Law enforcement also sought the assistance of profilers who attempted to create a psychological profile of the killer. Despite these efforts, the Green River Killer remained at large. The frustration and desperation of the victims' families and the public grew with each passing year. Questions were raised about the adequacy of the investigation and whether the killer had some connection to law enforcement or local government, allowing him to evade capture. In 2001, a major breakthrough finally came in the form of DNA evidence. The DNA of the killer was found on the bodies of several victims, conclusively linking the murders. This evidence allowed investigators to narrow their focus and home in on potential suspects. Among them was a man named Gary Ridgway, a long-haul truck driver who had been a person of interest in the case for some time. Gary Ridgway, initially arrested in 2001, would ultimately become synonymous with the Green River Killer. Ridgway, a seemingly unassuming and unremarkable man, had managed to evade suspicion for years. He was married and had children, blending into the community without raising any red flags. Ridgway's arrest and subsequent confession sent shockwaves through the region. The man who had eluded capture for so long had finally been caught. Ridgway's chilling confession detailed the gruesome details of his crimes, and he ultimately pleaded guilty to the murders of 49 women, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. The case of the Green River Killer revealed not only the darkness that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals, but also the shortcomings of law enforcement in handling cases involving marginalized victims. Many of the killer's victims were sex workers or had troubled backgrounds, making them vulnerable and less likely to receive the attention and resources needed to solve their cases. Gary Ridgway was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in exchange for his confession and cooperation with authorities. His arrest and conviction brought some closure to the families of his victims, but the scars left by his reign of terror continue to linger. The Green River Killer's story is a chilling reminder of the capacity for evil that exists in the world and the dedication of law enforcement and forensic experts to bring justice to the victims. It also underscores the importance of never forgetting the names and faces of those who fell victim to this heinous killer, as their memory serves as a lasting testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. Thanks for watching. To support us, please like and subscribe.